a female, you ain't doing anybody any harm. If that's how you were born, if that's what you believe, if that's what's in your mind, your heart, your psyche, and there's a means upon which to facilitate that transition without harming other people, have at it. I fully support the trans community in that regard. Where you lose me is in two places, okay? Number one,
something is happening inside women's basketball right now that the mainstream sports media does not want you to fully understand. Not the version they're packaging for you on highlight reels, not the carefully edited press conferences. The real story, the one happening behind closed doors, in locker rooms, on sidelines, and now explosively on national television screens across the entire country. A single player, someone the league never expected to become the face of this fight, has cracked the whole operation wide open. And the people sitting at the very top of the WNBA are scrambling right now, trying to figure out how to put the pieces back together. They can't, because what's been exposed cannot be buried again. Strap in, because this is the story the league desperately hoped would never get told. Before you can understand why the WNBA is in full crisis mode, you need to understand exactly who Sophie Cunningham is, because the league seriously underestimated her, and that miscalculation is what's costing them everything right now. Sophie Cunningham plays for the Indiana Fever. If you follow women's basketball even casually, you already know her as one of the most physical, aggressive, and flat-out fearless players on the floor. She sets screens that send players flying. She talks trash with a smile. She plays every single minute like it's the 7th game of a championship series. She is not delicate. She is not diplomatic, and she absolutely does not care about making powerful people comfortable. That reputation didn't happen overnight. Sophie built it game by game, year by year, by simply refusing to be anyone other than exactly who she is. In a league that, reports suggest, has quietly pressured players to fall in line with certain narratives and public positions, Sophie Cunningham has always been an outlier. She said what she thought, she played how she wanted to play, and she built a loyal, passionate fan base that follows her across the country precisely because of that authenticity. So when the WNBA's internal culture war finally boiled over this season, and the league's power brokers decided to make an example out of someone, they chose Sophie Cunningham. It was the worst decision they ever made, because Sophie Cunningham doesn't make examples out of people, she makes history. To understand how this whole explosion started, you have to go back to the pre-game warm-ups that set everything on fire. Reports indicate that a faction of coaches and players inside the WNBA had been pushing an increasingly aggressive political agenda for weeks before things finally cracked open publicly. The breaking point came when players and coaches began appearing on nationally televised broadcasts wearing shirts that read "Trans Kids Belong" during pre-game warm-ups, deliberately, calculatedly, knowing exactly what kind of attention it would generate. Now here's where it gets complicated. This wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was happening on the same courts where, according to multiple reports, fans wearing shirts with chromosomal messaging were being threatened with removal from arenas. The optics were impossible to ignore. Coaches wearing one political statement on live television, while league security reportedly moved to silence opposing viewpoints in the stands. That contradiction would eventually become one of Sophie Cunningham's most devastating pieces of ammunition. Sophie refused to participate in the pre-game political theater. She stood her ground publicly and made her position clear. Women's sports should remain for biological women. It was a stance that, depending on who you ask, is either a common-sense defense of athletic fairness or an act of exclusion. But here's the thing about Sophie Cunningham. She wasn't looking for a debate. She was drawing a line. And the moment she drew that line, the forces inside the league that had been watching her with growing frustration decided they'd had enough. What happened next on that sideline would shock even the most seasoned sports observers, and it would give Sophie Cunningham exactly the platform she needed to burn the whole narrative down.
You can't be a male, born a male, transitioning to female, and think that you should have the right to compete with women. Not in basketball. Not in football, not in boxing, not in the UFC. Hell, not even in tennis.
The footage spread fast, faster than the league's PR team could get ahead of it. An opposing WNBA coach, reportedly furious at Sophie's refusal to align with the political messaging being pushed inside the league, charged the sideline during a game and began screaming in front of players, fans, and cameras, hate speech, directed at Sophie and the supporters cheering her on from the stands. Let that sink in for a second. A professional head coach in a nationally visible game losing complete composure and screaming political accusations at a player and paying fans from the sideline. Not pulling a player aside, not filing a formal complaint through league channels, screaming in public, on camera. According to reports, factions within the league used that moment to push for serious consequences against Sophie. The goal, sources suggest, was to have her fined, suspended, and, most importantly, publicly humiliated into issuing an apology that would serve as a warning to any other player who thought about stepping out of line. The plan was clinical: silence her, make an example, restore order. They forgot one critical detail. Sophie Cunningham doesn't apologize for things she believes in. She stared back at that screaming coach with the kind of composure that only comes from someone who has already decided they have absolutely nothing to lose. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for her phone to call her agent. She didn't look to the bench for guidance. She just looked back, calm as ice, and let the coach's meltdown speak for itself. And while the league was busy trying to figure out how to weaponize that moment against her, Sophie was already planning her next move. A move that would take the fight somewhere the WNBA front office couldn't control, couldn't edit, and couldn't spin. If the league thought the sideline confrontation would shake Sophie Cunningham's confidence heading into a road game in Toronto, they were operating on a fundamentally wrong understanding of who they were dealing with. The Indiana Fever's trip across the border to play in Toronto was, by multiple accounts, one of the most hostile road environments a WNBA player has faced in recent memory. The media narrative leading up to the game had painted Sophie as a villain, the face of intolerance, the player who dared to question the league's ideological direction. The Canadian crowd had absorbed that framing completely, and when Sophie stepped onto that court, the arena unleashed. Deafening boos rained down from the moment she touched the ball. Fans in the front rows held up signs. Grown adults screamed insults from courtside. It was organized, it was sustained, and it was clearly designed to get inside her head and break her focus before the opening tip even hit the floor. It did the opposite. Sophie responded the way Sophie Cunningham always responds to pressure, by turning the volume up on her own game. She set harder screens, she hit bigger shots, she played with the kind of aggressive physical energy that made her famous in the first place, and every single time the arena erupted in boos, sources say Sophie smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a forced smile. The smile of someone who is completely comfortable in the chaos, who feeds on hostility rather than breaking under it.
By the final buzzer, Sophie hadn't just survived the hostile environment, she had owned it. The psychological dominance was total. But Sophie understood something that the Toronto crowd and the WNBA front office both missed. Winning on the court was only the beginning. The real fight was happening somewhere else entirely, and she was about to take it straight to the source. When Sophie Cunningham decided to take her case to the public, she didn't call ESPN. She didn't sit down with a beat reporter who covers the fever. She didn't issue a carefully worded statement through a publicist. She walked straight onto Fox News, looked directly into the camera, and delivered what many are calling one of the most brutally direct athlete interviews in recent sports media history.
The league's PR infrastructure had no warning, no time to prepare a counter-narrative, no opportunity to spin the optics. Sophie Cunningham was live, unfiltered, and completely unafraid. She laid out her position in plain language. She argued that biological males transitioning to female should not be competing in women's sports, not in basketball, not in any professional athletic context. She framed it not as hatred, but as a matter of basic competitive fairness for women who have built their careers in sports designed around biological female physiology. Her delivery was controlled, her logic was sequential, and her conviction was unmistakable. But the most explosive moment of the interview wasn't about the transgender debate at all. It was when Sophie turned her attention directly to WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert. Speaking as part of a wide-ranging profile later published by USA Today, Sophie reportedly described the league as needing a commissioner who is, in her words, bold, and who wants the best for the players, and not maybe for themselves all the time. That phrasing was not subtle. It was a direct, public challenge to the sitting commissioner's leadership, delivered on national television in an election year for Engelbert's contract, which reports confirm is set to expire after the 2026 season. Sophie pointed out what she described as a fundamental hypocrisy at the heart of the league's management, that coaches could wear political statements on nationally televised broadcasts without consequence, while fans expressing opposing views were reportedly being threatened with removal from arenas. She argued the league was systematically alienating the very fan base it needed most, the people buying tickets, watching on cable, purchasing merchandise, and keeping the financial engine running. It was the kind of interview that doesn't get forgotten, and the fallout started immediately. For years, the sports media ecosystem has operated with an unspoken understanding about how to cover WNBA controversies. You pick your spots carefully. You don't go too hard on the league. You keep things balanced in a way that protects relationships and keeps access open. That understanding, according to observers, has created a media environment where certain stories get softened, certain narratives get protected, and certain voices get amplified, while others get quietly buried. Stephen A. Smith just walked away from that understanding entirely. Sitting at the ESPN desk, the most visible seat in sports media, Stephen A. went completely off script. Instead of deflecting, instead of offering the usual measured both sides commentary, he looked into the camera and said Sophie Cunningham was exactly right. He didn't whisper it. He didn't frame it as a personal opinion offered reluctantly. He said it with the full force of someone who had clearly been thinking about this for a while and had decided the moment had come to stop pulling punches. Stephen A. ripped into the WNBA's leadership for what he described as putting ideology ahead of the product. He warned the league, publicly on their own broadcast partner's network, that if they continued allowing political agendas to override the actual business of running a professional sports league, they were heading toward financial catastrophe. He pointed to the incredible momentum the WNBA had built with a massive surge in viewership this season, and argued the league was in the process of squandering it for the sake of internal political battles that the average fan simply does not care about.
The significance of that moment cannot be overstated. When the single loudest voice in American sports media publicly aligns with a player who is actively challenging the sitting commissioner's leadership, it sends a message to every sponsor, every owner, and every front office executive that the narrative has officially shifted. The league could no longer claim the controversy was fringe. It was now the center of the most watched sports conversation in the country. And Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, notably, was nowhere to be seen. In the middle of a crisis of this magnitude, leadership is everything. The ability to step into the chaos, address it directly, and project confidence that the organization has a plan, that's the bare minimum expected of anyone running a billion-dollar sports enterprise. Cathy Engelbert did none of that. While Sophie Cunningham was giving interviews, while Stephen A. Smith was issuing warnings from the ESPN desk, while social media turned into an absolute battlefield over the future of women's sports, Engelbert was silent, conspicuously, almost deafeningly silent. Reports suggest that people inside and outside the league noticed. Some interpreted the silence as a sign that Engelbert already knows her tenure is coming to an end and has made a calculated decision to run out the clock quietly rather than fight for her position publicly. Her contract, confirmed by multiple reports, expires after the 2026 season. The math is not complicated. Meanwhile, the fans who had been watching all of this unfold made their own decision. A large-scale boycott of the WNBA began gaining real momentum. These weren't fringe accounts on social media. Reports indicate these were the core consumers, people who buy game tickets, pay for cable packages that carry WNBA games, purchase merchandise, and represent the financial backbone of the league's revenue model. And they were walking away, publicly, loudly, and with explicit demands attached. The demand was simple: respect biological women in women's sports, hold coaches accountable for their conduct on the sideline, and remove a commissioner who, in their view, had prioritized ideology over the athletes she was supposed to be protecting. Sponsors quietly began asking questions. Owners, sources suggest, started making phone calls. The television ratings that had been climbing so promisingly began to stall, and the WNBA, a league that was supposed to be riding the biggest wave of growth in its history thanks to a surge in mainstream attention this season, found itself staring down a PR catastrophe that had been entirely self-inflicted. Sophie Cunningham didn't create this crisis. She simply refused to pretend it wasn't happening, and in doing so, she forced an entire league to reckon with contradictions it had been carefully avoiding for years. Here's where things stand right now, stripped of the noise and the outrage and the political framing that both sides of this debate love to wrap around everything. The WNBA is at a genuine crossroads. The league has experienced real, significant growth. The talent on the floor is legitimate. The storylines this season have been compelling enough to draw in audiences who never watched women's basketball before. That momentum is real, and it matters. But internally, reports suggest the league has been struggling with a fundamental identity question that nobody in power wanted to answer out loud. Is the WNBA a sports league first, or an ideological platform first? Sophie Cunningham forced that question into the open, and the answer the league gives, through its handling of the commissioner situation, through how it addresses coach conduct, through how it responds to the growing boycott, will define what the WNBA actually is for the next decade.
Cathy Engelbert's future as commissioner is, according to multiple sources and by the plain logic of her expiring contract, almost certainly resolved. The question now is what kind of leadership replaces her? Sophie Cunningham, in her USA Today profile, described wanting someone bold, someone who puts players first, someone whose priorities align with where the league actually needs to go rather than where certain internal factions want to take it. Stephen A. Smith has made his position public. The fans have made their position visible through their wallets, and Sophie Cunningham is standing in the middle of all of it. The player who refused to apologize, refused to shrink, and refused to let the machine grind her into silence, watching the institution she forced into accountability try to figure out how to survive what she started.
Women's basketball deserves to thrive. It deserves the massive audiences and the corporate investment and the cultural respect that the best players in the game have spent decades earning. But whether it gets there by facing these internal contradictions honestly, or by continuing to pretend they don't exist until the financial damage becomes irreversible, that question is no longer Sophie Cunningham's to answer. She already did her part. The rest is up to the league, and right now, the league is running out of time to get it right. What do you think? Is Sophie Cunningham a hero for speaking out, or did this controversy go too far? And do you believe the WNBA can recover from this, or is the damage already done? The conversation happening right now in women's sports is bigger than any one player or any one commissioner. Drop your thoughts below.